Well, hello again. Welcome to what I'm going to call Lit in the Field or Literature in the Field. This will be the first episode where I thought I would combine my love of nature and the outdoors with a little bit of classic literature because I think that's something that people don't get enough of. And I wanted to start today with one of my favorites. And I have, of course, Walden. Walden, for me, was one of those formative texts, I think probably second only to the Bible, the amount of influence that it's had in my life. And I first read it, I know, in English Lit in high school, and reread it multiple times since then. And I've always appreciated Thoreau's sort of paradoxical nature as both a philosopher and a thinker and a naturalist, but also as just a man who appreciates the simple things in life. So I thought I would read some excerpts from this. I've got about 10 of those flagged. I don't know, it's such a profound text. It's easy to get lost in his sort of long sentences and obscure references at times, but then there's an observation that is, I think, it's so insightful. It was so insightful for me, at least, that I thought, wow, this guy really gets it. At least this is something that I would aspire to, or that I can see what he's experiencing. I can place myself in that situation. So, nice little graphic of Walden Pond outside of Concord, Massachusetts. And we'll start with the first bookmark here. I stole these off of my fruit tree tags, but let's read the first one. This is from the chapter on economy. And I think this is probably one of the most oft-cited excerpts, but you often don't get the whole thing. So Thoreau says here, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. From the desperate city, you go into the desperate country, and you have to console yourselves with the bravery of minks and muskrats. A stereotyped but unconscious despair is concealed even under what are called the games and amusements of mankind. There is no play in them, for this comes after work, but it is a characteristic of wisdom not to do desperate things." Now, if there is a more appropriate quotation for our day and time, I do not know of one. Because the vast majority of us punch that time card, 9 to 5, and we have our dinner, and we engage with our family, and we watch mindless TV, and we start all over again. And the weekend is gone in the flash of an eye, and we're back to the same routine. So I think that Thoreau offers some insights in Walden on how to break the cycle of desperation. And I don't claim to be practicing all of them, but this little adventure of me walking out in the woods and seeing what can be seen outside of my day-to-day rat race, I think is one attempt to do that. So one of the best quotations in the book. We move on. Still in economy. Most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only indispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. I should say not only not indispensable. With respect to luxuries and comforts, the wisest have ever lived a more simple and meager life than the poor. The ancient philosophers, Chinese, Hindu, Persian, and Greek, were a class than which none has been poorer in outward riches, but none so rich in inward. We know not much about them. Now, there's no doubt that poverty is rampant across the globe, and that those who are engulfed in poverty would have it any way but the way that they're experiencing it. What Thoreau is trying to say here is that those that have the greatest satisfaction in life do not achieve that satisfaction through means of monetary resources. This inward self-reflection and understanding That's the inward riches that he's speaking of. We move on to economy, to where I lived and what I lived for. And I think this gets in some of the nature observations. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue and so to make a few objects beautiful, but it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do. To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. Every man is tasked to make his life, even in its details, worthy of the contemplation of his most elevated and critical hour. If we refused, or rather used up, such paltry information as we get, the oracles would distinctly inform us how this might be done. Now here I think that we see some concordance between Thoreau and the Stoics, which he references a couple in here, in that we're not saying that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make yourself into a millionaire overnight, regardless of your context. But the greatest cage that we are encased in is that of our own mind. And that by choosing to be happy, or choosing to enjoy the circumstance, or choosing to overcome the trial, we're able to free ourselves from our own self-flagellation, essentially. And I'm guilty of that as an overthinker and type A personality. But the fact of the matter is that our internal perspective is greatly able to shape what we do with our lives. Same chapter, where I lived and what I lived for. This is hilarious. Oh, when I was such a naive college student back in the day, I had this particular quotation as my voicemail at university and got some raised eyebrows from an honors guidance counselor, I specifically recall. So, good times. Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in. I drink at it, but while I drink, I see the sandy bottom and detect how shallow it is. Its thin current slides away, but eternity remains. I would drink deeper, fish in the sky, whose bottom is pebbly with stars. I cannot count one. I know not the first letter of the alphabet. The folks, the thing is, you've got to make the best of the time that you are given. And everyone's got a limited amount here on earth, aside from preservation of your eternal soul, which is a topic for another day, but that I do believe in. But the fact of the matter is, you've got to get it each day and make it work for you, because no one else is going to. And if you lay by the wayside and try not to accomplish anything, that's exactly what you'll get done. And sometimes that's okay. Thoreau, when he set out to go to Walden, wasn't there to make a fortune hoeing beans, right? But when we measure time and recognize that time is limited and we have the ability to make the most of it, whatever the most is for us, that enables us to be effective in doing so. Okay, this is sounds. I love this because I am a particular, connoisseur of owl hoots. I love the sound of owls, especially in spring turkey season, when you're trying to get a tom to shock gobble and all the barred owls fly up next to you and start hooting and laughing at you. But Thoreau, I think, has one of the best descriptions of the sounds of owls in this particular book. Oh, I skipped that one. Oh, sorry about that. Here we go. When other birds are still, the screech owls take up the strain. Like mourning women, their ancient oolulu, their dismal scream is truly Ben Johnsonian. Wise midnight hags, it is no honest and blunt to-wit to-who of the poets, but, without jesting, a most solemn graveyard ditty. The mutual consolations of suicide lovers, remembering the pangs and the delights of supernal love in the infernal groves. Yet I love to hear their wailing, their doleful responses trilled along the woodside, reminding me sometimes of music and singing birds, as if it were the dark and tearful side of music, the regrets and sighs that would fain be sung. They are the spirits, the low spirits, and melancholy forebodings of fallen souls that once in human shape night walked the earth and did the deeds of darkness, now expiating their sins with their wailing hymns or threnodies of the scenery of their transgressions. They give me a new sense of the variety and capacity of that nature which is our common dwelling. Oh, so great. He goes on, but you probably don't want to listen to me talk for 15 minutes about what owls sound like, right? Moving on to solitude now. Yet I experience sometimes that the most sweet and tender, the most innocent and encouraging society may be found in any natural object, even for the poor misanthrope and most melancholy man. There can be no very black melancholy to him who lives in the midst of nature and has his senses still. There was never yet such a storm, but it was aeolian music to a healthy and innocent ear. Nothing can rightly compel a simple and brave man to vulgar sadness. While I enjoy the friendship of the seasons, I trust that nothing can make life a burden to me. The gentle rain which waters my beans and keeps me in the house today is not drear and melancholy, but good for me too. Though it prevents my hoeing them, it is of far more worth than my hoeing. If it should continue so long as to cause the seeds to rot in the ground and destroy the potatoes in the lowlands, it would be good for the grass on the uplands. And being good for the grass, it would be good for me. So Thoreau's perspective on rain, I think, recognizes overall that the natural cycles will continue either way. So you might as well get used to it and enjoy them. But the fact of the matter is that even things that displease us have a purpose. And in this case, the rain that kept him from working his field was feeding the field at the same time. Similar here, you can see just over here, we've got a little bit of a food plot. We've got 3.5 inches of rain in a couple of days, so haven't been able to do a whole lot. All right, still in solitude. I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of the time. To be in company, even with the best, is soon wearisome and dissipating. I love to be alone. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude. We are for the most part more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our chambers. A man thinking or working is always alone. Let him be where he will. Solitude is not measured by the miles of space that intervene between a man and his fellows. The really diligent student in one of the crowded hives of Cambridge College is as solitary as the dervish in the desert. The farmer can work alone in the field or the woods all day, hoeing or chopping, and not feel lonesome, because he is employed. But when he comes home at night, he cannot sit down in a room alone, at the mercy of his thoughts, but must be where he can see the folks and recreate and, as he thinks, remunerate himself for the day's solitude. And hence he wonders how the student can sit alone in the house all night and most of the day without ennui and the blues. But he does not realize that the student, though in the house, is still at work in his field and chopping in his woods, as the farmer in his, and in turn seeks the same recreation and society that the latter does, though it may be a more condensed form of it. Now, we know that no man is an island, right? And I am apt as anyone else to seek out the companionship of others. But the fact of the matter is, when you have purpose, you don't necessarily have a sorrowful solitude, right? You're able to enjoy that task and the sense of completion and reward for that. And I think that's what Thoreau's getting at here. Back to the bean field. This is another chapter. We are wont to forget that the sun looks on our cultivated fields and on the prairies and forests without distinction. They all reflect and absorb his rays alike, and the former make but a small part of the glorious picture which he beholds in his daily course. In his view, the earth is all equally cultivated like a garden. Therefore, we should receive the benefit of his light and heat with a corresponding trust and magnanimity. What though I value the seed of these beans, and harvest that in the fall of the year? This broad field which I have looked at so long looks not to me as the principal cultivator, but away from me to influences more genial to it, which water and make it green. These beans have results which are not harvested by me. Do they not grow for woodchucks partly? The ear of wheat should not be the only hope of the husbandman. Its kernel or grain is not all that it bears. How then can our harvest fail? Shall I not rejoice also at the abundance of the weeds whose seeds are the granary of the birds? It matters little comparatively whether the fields fill the farmer's barns. The true husbandman will cease from anxiety, as the squirrels manifest no concern whether the woods will bear chestnuts this year or not, and finish his labor with every day, relinquishing all claim to the produce of his fields, and sacrificing in his mind not only his first, but his last fruits also. So you can tell that Thoreau was a subsistence farmer and not trying to turn a profit over the long term, because I doubt many farmers would actually agree with that. But again, I think the grain of truth is embedded within here, and that is the supremacy of the natural cycle. Like everything that we do in some way has a tangential effect, whether we see it or not. And I think when it comes to conservation, we've had this mechanization of agriculture, and you'll see the fragmentation of habitat, and then the growth of monoculture, thousands of acres growing in the same crop, which is not as beneficial to the squirrels or the birds. And then obviously there's some biblical references here, right, as well. I think that this often reminds me of the folk song, The Cool of the Day. Gene Ritchie sang that one. The Lord is walking in the Garden of Eden, right? So the Lord, or the Son in this case, has dominion over all the earth and sees it all cultivated under his hand, but not necessarily only focusing on the cultivation that we do as agriculturalists. So I enjoyed that one as well. Baker Farm. As I was leaving the Irishman's roof after the rain, bending my steps again to the pond, my haste to catch pickerel, wading in retired meadows, in sloughs and bog holes, in forlorn and savage places, appeared for an instant trivial to me who had been sent to school and college. But as I ran down the hill towards the reddening west, with the rainbow over my shoulder, and some faint tinkling sounding borne to my ear through the cleansed air, from I know not what quarter, my good genius seemed to say, "Go, fish and hunt, far and wide by day, farther and wider, and rest thee by many brooks and hearthsides without misgiving. Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. Rise free from care before the dawn, and seek adventures. Let the noon find thee by other lakes, and the night overtake thee everywhere at home. There are no larger fields than these, no worthier games than may be here played. Grow wild according to thy nature, like these sedges and brakes, which will never become English hay. Let the thunder rumble. What if it threaten to ruin the farmer's crops? That is not its errand to thee. Take shelter under the cloud. While they flee to carts and sheds, let not to get a living be thy trade, but thy sport. Enjoy the land, but own it not. Through want of enterprise and faith, men are where they are, buying and selling and spending their lives to serfs. I love that one too. The wanderlust verses within Walden, I think, are my favorites of the whole book. And I love that. The sense of freedom that you can get from rambling, when you can not have something on the agenda and you can burn some boot leather and walk, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 miles in a day and just sit down at the pond, eat a sandwich, look at a bird, whittle with your knife, right? Shoot a squirrel, make a campfire. All of that, I think, is good for the soul. And Thoreau, despite his tendency towards vegetarianism, has this primal urge as well. And that's the last one that I have flagged here for you. Higher laws, this chapter. As I came home through the woods with my string of fish, trailing my pole, it being now quite dark, I caught a glimpse of a woodchuck stealing across my path, and felt a strange thrill of savage delight, and was strongly tempted to seize and devour him raw. Not that I was hungry then, except for that wildness which he represented. Once or twice, however, while I lived at the pond, I found myself ranging the woods like a half-starved hound, with a strange abandonment, seeking some kind of venison which I might devour, and no morsel could have been too savage for me. The wildest scenes had become unaccountably familiar. I found in myself, and still find, an instinct towards... An instinct toward a higher, or as it is named, spiritual life, as do most men, and another towards a primitive, rank, and savage one, and I reverence them both. I love the wild not less than the good. The wildness and adventure that are in fishing still recommended to me. I like sometimes to take a rank hold on life and spend my day more as the animals do. Perhaps I have owed to this employment and to hunting, when quite young, my closest acquaintance with nature. They early introduced to us and detain us in scenery which would otherwise, at that age, we should have little acquaintance. Fishermen, hunters, wood choppers, and others, spending their lives in the fields and woods, in a peculiar sense, a part of nature, themselves are often in a more favorable mood for observing her, in the intervals of their pursuits, than philosophers or poets even, who approach her with expectation. She is not afraid to exhibit herself to them. The traveler on the prairie is naturally a hunter. On the headwaters of the Missouri and Columbia, a trapper, and at the falls of St. Mary, a fisherman. He who is only a traveler learns things at second hand and by the halves, and is poor authority. We are most interested when science reports what those men already know practically or instinctively, that for alone is a true humanity, or an account of human experience. Now, I love that. If you will excuse me, I'm going to put away Walden. I'm going to celebrate my own wildness, and I think I'm going to do a little bit of hunting. So let's go see if we can't find a coyote, and I'll see you next time on Lit in the Field. Have a good one.